Good evening, everybody. And for those of us who were together about 10 minutes ago, it's not F8 anymore. It is now the proper one. P7, Advanced Audit and Assurance. And this is our final 1 hour mentoring session. Now, before we go any further, because I know someone is going to ask this at some point soon, I have not finished marking the P7 mock exams yet. My apologies if you are one of the people who is still waiting. Ivy, for example, I know you are one of those. And there may be other people here as well. So apologies, I am still marking them. You will get it sent back, scanned back to you the moment I have finished yours. I would say most of them during the course of this evening. There might have to be a small number tomorrow morning, but they're going to get done, all right? It seems I encourage people to do the P7 mock exam rather more than any other tutor does, judging by the numbers we've had. P7 is miles ahead, and I do mark all of them myself, and F8. Anyway, so mock exam coming back soon. Right, we have got 1 hour. Let me tell you how this is going to work. This is designed to be a question and answer session for you, which means I am meant to be here saying, guys, talk to me, ask me anything. But of course, you might have turned up waiting to see if anybody else asks a question, or we might have a little flurry of questions and then they stop. And come on, this is your final hour with me before an exam on Monday, which for some of you could be the last exam you have to sit, which is pretty serious and very important stuff. So I always come along to this with my own plan as well. If I see any questions off to my left on this screen, they will take priority and I will answer them. But what I'm also going to do is tell you what you should be doing during the weekend, what you should be doing on Monday morning as your last final stuff. I knew you would say that, Irfan. I knew someone was going to. What you should be looking at over the weekend, what you should be thinking and have going on in that head of yours on Monday before you go into the exam hall, and what you should do in the first 10 to 15 minutes of exam time. Because if you do the right things in the morning and in those first 10 to 15 minutes, you're well placed to pass. So I will be talking to you a lot this evening about the right exam technique, what you should be thinking when you do each type of question. But I do also have one piece of knowledge down on my list of things to review, and Irfan has got in there before I even had to say it. Audit reports. Audit reports, audit reports, audit reports. So, what we are going to do is begin with a reminder about audit reports. What might you be asked at this sitting to do with audit reports? Well, Irfan has said outcomes, and yes, there are frequently questions that say, here is a story, what is the potential impact on the audit report? But apart from the new MERG paragraph, all other outcomes are identical to what they were when you studied F8. So there's not that much that's changed there. I think you might also have to talk about the key audit matters section. You might be asked, why have audit reports changed? What's the point of all of this? There are, of course, examiner articles on this subject. I've written my own article about the examiner's articles and put that article up on Canvas. You have plenty of reading material. Okay. Oh, hang on. Review of going concern. If they didn't put it... Yeah, all right, Gabriella. We're going to do audit reports, including audit reports with going concern. Okay? Let's do this, folks. Right. We will start, therefore, with indeed audit report outcomes. I would say there are 8 potential outcomes One of those is really boring and is unlikely to appear in an exam question because the outcome is there is no impact. Nothing happens. Boring. So let's look at the other 7 outcomes. There are 4 potential modifications to the opinion section, and there are 3 potential extra paragraphs where the opinion section is not touched. It's unmodified. Just a little note, because there's typically a mark for saying this, 4 modifications to the opinion. If you ever modify the opinion, you explain the modification in the basis for opinion section. So if you are describing impact on audit report, any modification, there'll be a mark for saying basis for opinion. We'll explain that modification. Right, let's do that and let's do that. So, 4 modifications to the opinion. There are 2 reasons we change the opinion, which is lack of evidence, and the financial statements are wrong. I know the official word is misstated, but you've got an exam on Monday and we need to cut down to basics. And then there are 2 levels of problem, aren't there? There is material, there is pervasive, material, pervasive. And we've got adverse opinion, the accounts do not give a true and fair view. We've got disclaimer of opinion. Lacking so much evidence, I don't know if the accounts give a true and fair view. And of course, this one, except for qualified opinion, and except for qualified opinion. So those are the 4 potential opinion changes we can get. Now, you said someone, Gabriella, you asked me a couple of questions, and I think maybe we can build some going concern into this, can't we? Because if, which colour do we want this to be? Let's make it blue. If the client says they're a going concern, but the auditor says, oh no, you're not a going concern, that would be an example of adverse. So client says going concern, but auditor says not. That would be an adverse. What if you go and talk to the client and say, right, we need to assess your ability to continue trading for the next 12 months. Show me your forecasts, show me your strategy, show me your plans. And the directors say, my friend, in this business, there's no point in having a plan, everything can change like that. So we don't plan ahead. We have no strategies, we have no forecasts, we have no forward information at all. We just turn up every day and see what happens. Now, I appreciate that is a fairly unlikely event. But if your client can supply no evidence about their future, then I think we'll have to issue a disclaimer, because if you don't know if they're a going concern or not, that affects everything in the accounts. Pervasive. What if there is, and hold on to your hats because this is where it's going to get fiddly, what if There is a material uncertainty related to their going concern situation. They probably will be okay, but there's a doubt. And they have accounted for that badly because they have failed to disclose in the accounts that going concern uncertainty. Well, I think the financial statements are wrong. They're only missing one disclosure note. So if the company has a going concern uncertainty, but has failed to disclose it either at all, or you don't think they've put enough information in, then it's going to be an except for qualified opinion. Okay? Right, let's come up here. 3 potential extra paragraphs. Well, those, of course, are emphasis of matter, other matter, and the new one, which used to be included as an emphasis of matter but has now been split out to give it more prominence, importance. A merg. Now, I was just saying this to my F8 students. MURGC should be obvious to the marker what you're talking about, but this is a brand new audit standards requirement. And the simple fact is, merg is not an official set of 5 letters. I wouldn't say I invented it. It seemed like the obvious thing to say. You are probably safest writing material uncertainty re going concern, and then in brackets write MURGC afterwards, and then if you have to say it again, you can call it MURGC, can't you? So 3 potential extra paragraphs. Now, very important, the opinion is not modified because the financial statements are correct. With an other matter paragraph, the issue there is the financial statements are correct, but something in the company's annual report is wrong. And because that thing that is wrong is conflicting with the financial statements that say something that's right, the shareholders might get confused. The accounts are fine, so financial statements true and fair, opinion not modified. But we add an other matter paragraph to tell the shareholders when reading the annual report, beware that someone has written something a bit stupid. What's an emphasis of matter? Again, the financial statements are correct. But there is an important financial statement disclosure note that you want to highlight. The key point now being it is not to do with going concern, because a merg is basically the same as an emphasis of matter, except it's an emphasis of matter to do with going concern uncertainty. So it's got its own special name, and it appears higher up in the audit report than an emphasis of matter is going to. That's all, okay? So to be clear, what is a merg? A merg is where the financial statements are correct, but there is an important financial statement disclosure note about a material going concern uncertainty. So with all 3 of these extra paragraphs, the accounts are fine. That's why the opinion is not modified. The accounts are fine. So financial statements are correct. All 3 of these are designed to highlight something. A mistake in the annual report, other matter, or a disclosure note in the accounts of interest. And if it's really of interest, going concern, it is called a merg. And there you have it. Those are your outcomes. So going back to potential scenarios, client says going concern, and we agree. We point out there's a going concern uncertainty, and the client says, okay, fair enough, we'll disclose it. Disclose it in full. Financial statement's correct, but because it's a going concern uncertainty, we end up with an unmodified opinion and a merg. Right, questions. What is important for emphasis of matter? Do you mean examples? Okay, possible examples. What you've got to think is, what might a company have to disclose under the accounting rules, which is not as important as going concern, but you'd still want the shareholders to be aware of it. And maybe the best way to think about this is, let's think what sort of things are disclosed in disclosure notes, and then remind ourselves how incredibly boring a lot of them are. There is a description of the director's pay in great detail. I'm sure the shareholders are reading that anyway. It's in every set of accounts disclosures. There's no need to highlight that. Depreciation policies. Boring. We're not going to highlight that. But what if there's a new accounting standard being applied for the first time this year? And it's had quite an impact on what their financial statements look like. There'll be a disclosure note saying we are putting IFRS 15 in place for the first time this year. We have restated comparatives. I think that is the sort of disclosure note that's not going concern related, but I'd want to make sure the shareholders have read, because it has a big impact this year. It's a big change on the company. So I think that could be an emphasis of matter. Of course, if this is a listed company, we might not need it to be an emphasis of matter, because in the order of prioritization, we think, do we need a key audit matter section before we get to emphasis of matter? So if the client is listed, before you think emphasis of matter, you ask yourself, would this have been discussed at length with the audit committee? Because if it was, it's going in CAMS and will get a lot more detail than it would do in an emphasis of matter. Come back to that in a minute. Is there anything else except for the annual report being wrong that could be included in other matters? That's an interesting question, actually. In theory, the answer is yes. For the exam, highly unlikely, and we've never seen anything else. It will be chairman's statement or social environmental report or integrated report or something provided to the shareholders with the audited accounts, but it's not the audited accounts. Oh yes, CAMS, right, okay. So what I have just done is taken you through the various outcomes we can have, and the outcomes can affect any company whatsoever, listed or otherwise, depending on what is going on there. Key audit matters are not an outcome based on what's going on at the company. Key audit matters does not depend on what's going on at the company, it depends on what type of company it is. So I don't really care what's been going on at the company. If you're listed, you're having one. Now, even that statement is potentially not as simple as it first sounds, because it is feasible to not have a key audit matters section if the only things that were discussed at length with the audit committee were things that ended up being modifications to the opinion or a merg. because if you've already got it explained somewhere else in the opinion or as a merg, there is no need to have key audit matters. And key audit matters could, in theory, say there are no other key audit matters to convey to you shareholders other than the matters that related in modified opinion or in the merg. It is possible to have none. I'd be very surprised if you had to say that on exam day, but it is made clear in her article that that is the case, and therefore I guess we should consider it. So, if your client is listed on the stock exchange, they must have a CAM section. What goes in the CAM section? Now, this was on the mock exam, I think, or was it? Actually, no, maybe it wasn't. I can't remember. Was it? Wasn't it? I get confused. This is meant to have in it all matters that were discussed at length with the audit committee. And that is likely to be risks of material misstatement, maybe fraud issues, controls weaknesses, things about the company that shareholders probably would benefit from knowing were under discussion. If it's risks of material misstatement, which is what most of these are likely to be, it's likely to mostly be subjective areas, complicated areas. Maybe areas where this company accounts for it in a rather different way to what other companies in the industry do. They've got a sort of unique accounting solution. Well, that's something that would have to be discussed. So the sort of things which are mentioned in the audit standard and the articles would be things like impairment, especially of intangibles, provisions, contingent liabilities, financial instrument valuations, anything with fair value in, because it's a matter of opinion. And what must be disclosed in the audit report is what is the issue, what did the auditor do about it in their audit work, and what were the conclusions reached. But just to repeat what I said earlier, if you've already modified your opinion because they've got it wrong, you will have explained this thing already. If you've already put a merg in your audit report, then you've explained the uncertainty already. Job done. What in effect this section is there to do is this. I for years have been saying that it seems a bit ridiculous that we turn up to audit a company's accounts. If they put right every mistake we find, before this new style of audit report, shareholders would be told absolutely nothing. Because the accounts are now right. They'd just be told the accounts are true and fair. The end. And I can't help thinking that if there were that many problems and discussions and debates with the client before the accounts got corrected, shouldn't the shareholders be told about all of this? So Key Audit Matters is designed to say to the shareholders, here's all the fun we had on this audit with the client, for things they've got right, eventually. And also, of course, not likely to be going concern, because if there's a going concern uncertainty, we'd have a merg instead. That is the point of having it. A description of the audit of those things not already mentioned in the audit report somewhere else. Okay, let's have a look. Can the same issue be disclosed in both the emphasis of matter, other matter and CAM section of the audit report? No, you only need to mention something once. Emphasis of matter and other matter are totally different things. You can't have the same thing in both of them because they're like apples and armchairs. They're two totally different things. Emphasis of matter is something in the financial statements that's right. Other matter is something not in the financial statements and it's wrong. So it certainly can't appear in both of those. If you've already put something in key audit matters, there's no point having an emphasis of matter as well, because you've already emphasised it by putting it in the CAMs. I suppose what I should say is this. Irfan, can we add CAMs in our answers while discussing matters? Do you mean matters and evidence question? That's an interesting point. Yeah, if it's a listed client, a matter to consider is our need to put this in the audit report in the CAMs section. Yeah, I think that could work actually. Good point. Right, what was I going to say? Yes. Order of decision. And we'll do this for a listed company just so CAMs are in there as well. 1. Does opinion need modification? 2. If the answer to 1 is no, do we need a merg? If 1 and 2 are both no, and remember this is a listed company, was issue discussed at length with AudCom? Because if the answer is yes, we get a CAM. And 4, if 1 plus 2 plus 3 are all no, is there a financial statement disclosure worth highlighting? Because if the answer is yes, we'd get an emphasis of matter. Given that an other matter is nothing to do with things in the financial statements, I'm not going to put other matter up in that analysis. I think you want to treat it separately from your thought process. So notice there is a prioritization issue here, because the opinion, the first thing we consider, is at the top of the audit report. That's the most important place. The merg goes underneath the basis for opinion, so that's the next lowest thing down. Key audit matters are likely to be placed ahead of an emphasis of matter. But the main reason why key audit matters are more important is because of the amount of detail that needs to be put into a key audit matter. Describe the issue. What audit work did you do? What conclusions were reached? An emphasis of matter paragraph is simply going to say, hello shareholders, you might want to go and read note 27. It's not giving much detail. How do I think CAMs and merg will be examined? Good question. Well, I suppose there's two ways, aren't there? There is ask you to explain them, and then there's here's a story, describe the impact on the audit report. And if it is something to do with CAMs, the keywords to look out for are audit committee and discussion, because that's the key. If it's not discussed with the audit committee, it's not going in the audit report as a CAM. And if you can see anything to do with going concern threats in the question and it says audit reports, take a very deep breath, remind yourself of what I've been going through on this tonight, make sure your head's on straight, and then have a go at it, because it could be technically quite tricky. Okay. I want to move away from audit reports now because it's only one thing on the syllabus typically an optional question. So of course you could avoid it in all possibility, but we'll see. I said to you at the start, technique is very important for P7. I say that at the start of every course. All of our revision, we focus on how to do the questions. My message to you is that this weekend, what I would say is the best thing you can do is go and look at as many past exam questions as possible, but don't write any answers. You're going to think answers. And if you go and read, if you go and read a past exam question and it says this, risks of material misstatement, or of course it might say the audit risks, or it might say the business risks. I do hope that the moment you see any of those three things, you know exactly what you're going to do. Now, audit risk is the risk of material misstatement, and the audit staff don't spot those misstatements, so detection risk is included as well. Personally, I don't think it's worth worrying about detection risk. I would say that these two things here are so close to being the same for exam purposes, I'd pretend they are. So for both of these, what you've got to be able to do is say which financial statement items you think are at risk, over or under, and try to be specific if you can. Say why, mentioning the accounting rules that are relevant to the situation. And if there are numbers, calculate materiality at least twice in your answer, because usually there are 2 materiality marks available. If you see a question that says business risks, explain the damage to the company, and it is very important that you add to what the scenario says. Because sometimes the scenario almost seems to be telling you what the business risk is. On the mock exam, for example, the hotels question had business risks, and in it it says a lot of competitors are investing in environmentally friendly systems for the hotels and are winning business from your client. Your client doesn't have the money to invest in it, falling behind. Well, if the story has already said losing business, corporate clients, if you just say, oh, if you don't invest in this stuff, you'll lose business, you're just repeating the story. You'll get half a mark, probably. You need to say the hotel's business is a reputation business. You make money if people who stay in your hotel want to come back and stay again. So what people think about your hotel and what they tell other people about your hotel is very important. And of course, corporate clients, if people are staying, going back and saying, I love this hotel, we should all stay there, you're not getting one extra guest, you could be getting dozens, hundreds. So you need to add to it. You could even say the company is going to come under pressure to spend the money on the systems it can't really afford because it has no choice, it has to compete, and that could further cause them cash flow problems because they're having to spend the money. But you must add to the story. The answer to your 2 questions is yes, I do, and you should have been here at the start, because if you had been, you'd have heard me tell you I'm still marking the mocks. You'll get them back as soon as I possibly can, but obviously I can't mark them when I'm standing here. How do you know when to stop adding to the story? Well, Steve, what a good question. Business risks, the marking key normally allows up to 1.5 marks per explanation of a business risk. I normally run on the theory that 2 to 3 lines of writing is 1 mark. So 1.5, I guess, is going to be 3, 4 or 5 lines. Or look at it this way, we mark in halves. And if you want to get a mark and a half, you have got to say 3 things to get 3 lots of half mark. So the best way to do that typically is to say, here is a risk, and then try to say, because duh, and because of that, duh, and because of that, duh. And try and say 3 separate things. Or 2 or 3 would be good. Okay. Now, as long as you know, for risk, that that is what you're meant to be thinking and writing, well, that's about as much as you need to know. Except, of course, if you're explaining accounting rules when you're doing risks of material misstatement, what if the accounting rules are horrible? To which I would say, in any question, there'll be some risks which are complicated and some which are easier. They are all worth the same marks. So do the easier ones. I would also say that the easier ones are typically found at the end of stories rather than at the beginning. So make sure you've read the whole story before you start writing your answer. Otherwise, you could be wasting time trying to explain things you really don't understand when you could have been explaining things you do understand. Next. Another very common exam question. Every sitting we seem to get one of these. Matters and evidence. Now I hope you don't mind. I'm having a bit of an issue with my throat. We had to do this in the last one as well. End of term, exams next week. Off comes the tie. I'm in fighting mood. Righty-ho, matters and evidence. Her answers seem to have decided that the matters to consider are: what are the relevant accounting rules for the situation? And you'll get half a mark for stating each relevant rule. Of course, it has to be relevant to the story. You then need to apply it to the story. Now, sometimes the story won't tell you how they've actually accounted for it, and sometimes the story will. If it doesn't tell you how they've accounted for it, all you're really able to say is, well, I can't tell, but they might have got this wrong. If it does tell you how they've accounted for it, brilliant news. Because if it does tell you how they've accounted for it, if they have got this materially wrong, then you should mention that a qualified even audit opinion is going to be necessary if they don't correct it. And of course, in order to know if they've got it materially wrong, you're going to have to calculate materiality. Evidence. Because these questions have stories, they don't just say, what are the matters and evidence relating to brands? There's a story. You know what I think. I think you should test each fact in the story. So each fact, each event, each amount, test everything you're told. If it says the board made a decision, read the board minutes to confirm it. If it said there's been an announcement, read the announcement to confirm it. What was announced? What was the date it was announced? If they've bought anything, there'll be a purchase agreement or an invoice. If they've sold anything, there'll be a sales agreement or a sales invoice. So just think, what evidence is there likely to be? If you need help with that, think AEIOU, think Dada 3 to help come up with ideas. And as you also know, I am very much of the opinion that the accounting rules are difficult, and if you focus on those, I'd say the majority of students, probably 3/4 of students who try to talk accounting, don't do a great job. This, on the other hand, is an easy mark, and this is a relatively easy thing to do. Forget about the accounting. Don't let it get in the way of your thinking. Focus on those two things first. Only worry about these when you've already done that and that. This is common sense. So that is matters and evidence. This will be uploaded after this session. There is someone sitting outside who I believe shortly after 7:15 will close all of this down, save it, sort it out, and it will be uploaded tonight. Okay? Relax. Now the other main one for technique is ethical and professional issues. And you will of course remember that I think you should be thinking 4 things there and 4 things there. So the moment you see these things in questions, think SAFIM, is there a confidentiality breach we need to do and report the client? Conflicts of interest, integrity of client. Professional issues. No problem. I listened to people's complaints about this. It always affects me, you see. Because my exams are both on Monday in exam week, I end up doing this session on the Friday the week before. And then, of course, no one can see it because it gets uploaded on Monday when you're all in the exam hall. So I had a word with them. We have improved based on your feedback. Are there any money laundering clues? Anything to do with auditor liability? Think practice management, because it could have something to do with the quality control of your work. It could be about setting your fees. It could be about tendering. It could be about advertising, etc., etc. And think impact on audit process. Now, who knows which things from those lists it will actually be? Until you see the question, who knows? So this is an ideas list to help you think of what it might be about. But sometimes the scenario is only about threats to independence. It's SAFIM and that's it. Sometimes it's 2 clients, clear conflict of interest, and that's it. And of course, if the question says, here is a proposed advert for your audit firm, I think it's about advertising, isn't it? If it says you are looking to tender up against other audit firms to try and win a new client, it's probably about tendering. If it's clear it's about one topic, then talk about that. But if it doesn't tell you what it's about, be open to the fact that it could have multiple issues. There's a good example in the revision kit on this. A question call. There are 2 stories. One is grouse and one is plover. I've got a feeling it's December 11 or December 12, something around that time. No, June 12. June 12 this came up. And in the story, you overhear 2 doctors in your client's, it's a hospital client, having a chat, and one saying, oh, just well, they didn't check my references before they hired me. I haven't passed my exams yet. Well, if I hear that, let's look at that list. Threats to my independence. No. Confidentiality breach. Do we need to report this to somebody? Well, I'd certainly tell management and the audit committee that I'm worried about this. If it turns out the hospital is not checking references for people who are then doing surgical things, that's dangerous. They need to be reported to the medical authorities. Yes. Unless you audit another hospital, there's no conflict of interest. Integrity of client, if they are deliberately failing to check references, they don't sound like very professional, competent or nice people to me. They're risking patients' lives. Yeah, integrity of client. I don't think they're money laundering. Liability, if anyone finds out that we know about this and we didn't report it, maybe. Practice management, nothing obvious I can think of in there. Impact on audit process, if they're breaking the law, they're going to get fined by the medical authorities, aren't they? So if they're breaking the law, provisions, and who knows, maybe they'll have their medical license taken away, shut down, going concern threat. It's interesting what you say about least favourite, because you can recognise them but not explain them. Do you know what? The vast majority of students on exam day will do the ethics question if they have to choose. Probably because there's no accounting rules in it. And you know what? The quality of the answers is not that good. I would strongly encourage you to do the matters and evidence question, because I think if your technique's right, it's impossible to fail it. Who cares what accounting areas come up? Strangely, they're irrelevant to passing it. If you get a relatively obviously asked audit reports question in the optional questions, I think you want to do that as well. Ethics professional issues. I think the explanations are sometimes quite difficult to pitch. So yeah, I agree with you. Right, I've got some questions and I need to answer these because we've only got 10 minutes left. What have we got? What is the M in Safim? Management threat. Thank you, Nams, for jumping in with that. Management threat is where you make decisions. Instead of advising your client, you actually make a decision for them. The danger is if people outside the company, like shareholders, see you making decisions that the directors should be making, they start to say, well, where is the difference between the directors and the auditors? I thought you're meant to be separate. So they question your independence. Is there any difference for the international and UK audit report? A little bit. Now, I asked for some things to be uploaded onto Canvas, and one of those things is an article about audit reports, but it's not one thing, it's actually two things. Because one of the articles says P7 UK stream. I think the only difference worth knowing about if you're doing UK stream is in the basis for opinion section, UK stream only, the auditors need to explain how they assessed materiality and what materiality figure they used. Not for international stream, okay? Just UK. Apart from that, there are some specific UK reporting rules which don't affect other countries, but I can't imagine that's going to be important, so I'd ignore it if I were you. The materiality thing, apart from that though, it's the same for everybody. Okay. The simple fact, by the way, is that if you look at audit reports in 25 different countries, they all look subtly different. If they're all following international audit standards, they'll all look pretty similar in structure. But remember, audit standards are there to guide us as auditors. The law we cannot ignore, can we? We have to follow the law. So if 25 countries have 25 different views on things that have to be in an audit report, there'll be 25 different audit reports. It may be money laundering if they're breaking the law and profiting from it. Yes, very fair point. If they aren't checking, yeah, That's fair point. But they would need to be breaking the law. If they're not following hospital regulations, but they're not actually breaking a law that could involve going to prison, I don't think, strictly speaking, it's the proceeds of a crime. So it would need to be the law. What else have we got? Any advice regarding time management? Yes, manage your time. Ha ha. Look, my view on this is very simple. In question 1, the one where I suppose you've got the biggest risk of going over on time, there are 4 professional marks, which I need to mention, and then 31 marks of content, which means you need to write 31 marks worth of content. Don't look at the story and say, oh, the story's so big. Who cares? Just go and find 31 marks worth of stuff and deal with it. If there's a really big story, there's probably a lot more than 31 marks worth of stuff available. Understand how the marks are and go and find that number of things. So if it's risk of material misstatement and it's worth, say, 18 marks, I would say 2 for materiality probably. You got 16 left, and it's up to 2 marks for a risk of material misstatement. But your explanations probably won't be perfect, so why not assume you're getting on average a mark and a half? 16 divided by 1.5 is about 10 or 11. Go and find 10 or 11 risks. You'll probably find 20. Ditch the hard ones, 10 or 11, whop them in your answer, push it to one side and move on to the next question. You don't have to read the entire story if you're a slow reader. Obviously, it's a bit dangerous not to read the whole thing, because you might assume something that later in the question you're actually told the opposite. But you keep reading until you've found enough content to write about. Then you write it. I suppose if you are really concerned about running out of time, maybe it is best to do question 1 last, because the bigger the story, the bigger the risk of running out of time. Steve, you say, what about quality control for this question? I presume you mean the hospital one. Quality control, I mean the audit work, not the hospital's quality control. Audit work. Yeah, first 15 minutes. I'm coming on to that, okay? Right, couple of other things I need to mention. Professional marks. Question number 1. There are 4 of them. There are no halves. You either get 1 or you get nothing. You'll get 1. It will be briefing notes. It always is. 2, from, date, subject. You'll get 1 for having an introduction. You'll have 1 for having headings throughout your answer, and 1 is very hard for you to judge, quality of writing. The last one is subjective. It's up to us, the markers. The first 3 are fact. If you do it, you get the mark. So do it. 2 other things I've got to tell you. Watch dates carefully. It is a real-time exam. You are sitting it on the 5th of December 2016. If it says on the 13th of January 2016, that was about 11 months ago. If it says on the 1st of December 2016, that was 4 days ago. All dates real. Watch them carefully. Explain every point you make. Say something, then say why. Typically when we mark, it's a half a mark and a half a mark. As I've said earlier, if it's something like business risk, keep going with the whys, because with risk questions, there's typically additional available. In any question where you're asked to analyse something, you know, what are the quality control issues? Anything to do with issues. It may be the case that there's more than 1 mark per point. Risk, definitely. Matters and evidence, unlikely. Ethical professional issues, also unlikely, to be honest. But anything else, there might be more than a mark. So when you're explaining, if you can go on and just add one more phrase, you know, because of that, and therefore also this, it may be worth doing. There might be additional halves up for grabs. Okay. Now, I've gone through technique for the biggest core areas where technique really works. This weekend, I suggest to you that you go and look at as many past exam questions as you can, but focus on the requirements. And one of the reasons for that is what I think you should do in the first 15 minutes. Because on exam day, for the final 1 hour before you go into the exam hall, all I want you to look at is technique. When you are in the exam hall, in the first 15 minutes or so of the exam, you are going to read all 5 questions, but the requirements only. Because the requirements tell you the technique, not the story. You then write your technique next to each requirement for all 5 questions. You need to do this because you've just spent the last hour thinking technique, technique, I know what I'm going to do, right? If you don't do this at the start of the exam, all that technique is going to disappear out of your head as the panic starts setting in. The sooner you write this stuff down, the safer it is. Write it next to the requirements for each question on the question paper, because then when you go to do each question later, 2 hours, 2.5 hours later, you're now criminally insane and losing it big time, and there staring you in the face is what I've told you to do for each question type. It's as close to me being in the exam hall guiding you as we're allowed to do. My view is if you do that in the first 15 minutes, number one, you've got your technique staring you in the face, which is as good as it's going to get to try and make you do it throughout the 3 hours and 15 minutes. But also, the reason I say do it for all 5, I think it's only after you think technique that you're going to work out what question you want to do. Look at it this way. If you look at a matters and evidence question, and you just have a quick glance up at the story, and you see some horrible accounting thing, your brain is already saying, uh-oh, don't want to do this. Whereas if you see matters and evidence and scribble down all the technique, remembering materiality and test every fact in the story are both easy, that will remind you that you want to do that question. So that is how I think most students are going to be best placed to pass this exam. Some of you are very bright, have done lots of study, completely understand the audit process and, importantly, have great accounting knowledge that you're good at explaining. If you are that person, you are probably going to be all right whatever I say. Just remember it's an auditing exam. Yes, you need accounting explanations, but they're not the be-all and end-all. I still think any student is probably best following my technique. Even I follow my technique, and I know all the accounting rules and can explain all of them. I'd still go for easy marks first though. Right, my friends, we have had 1 hour. It goes so fast at this stage, doesn't it? Upload. I don't have IAS summaries. This is not an accounting course. If you want summaries of accounting standards, they're in your class notes and presumably in your P2 notes. I do not have summaries of accounting standards. And I really don't think looking at audit standards, if that's what you meant, at this stage with the exam on Monday is such a clever idea. If I can, it's not going to happen before Monday because everyone will have gone home. It's not going to happen. If you've got specific queries about specific audit standards or accounting, ask. But there is no summary of accounting standards on the audit course. Doesn't exist. Right, couple of final thoughts. You have an exam on Monday. The very best of luck. Follow the techniques, please, 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 please. After the exam is finished, email me. Tell me what came up. Tell me what it was like. Remember, we don't necessarily see all the questions these days. And hopefully, good luck, everybody. Oh, thank you, Anna. That's very kind. Hopefully, around about January the 16th, you'll also be emailing me to tell me what fabulous marks you've got. You've finished all your exams. You're about to get a huge pay rise. Yay. For now, time for me to go. I'm glad you've enjoyed it, Ivy. Let's hope enjoyment turns into great exam result. Anyone not got their mock back, you'll get it back very soon. Thank you. Have a great weekend. Don't panic. Follow the technique. Good luck on Monday. Bye-bye, everyone.